you asked a question about, was I looking outside of myself at other people my age and other tracks in their life? And I think I've never been that person. I think that the beauty of this life that we get to live is that you can do it however you want to do it, and there's many ways to do it. So I've always had hope and optimism that even if this one thing that I think is amazing doesn't work out, there's a million other things I could do. And that's an incredible feeling that I don't take for granted, and I wish more people had this level of optimism and hopefulness that you're meant for so much more than just this one thing. And I think by taking the pressure off a specific path that might feel quite linear and might feel vocational, and you might think this is what I want to do forever, I think holding on to that but being open to the fact that there are many other ways to kind of build a career, build a professional life, I think just gives me comfort and enables me to take risks and move forward. So my name is Tony McGaharan and I'm from People Playbook, and our business is all around supporting organizations with learning, leadership and team development, but in a really fun and creative way.
So I want to jump back to the beginning of your life and your story. Who was Tony when you were younger, and how did you feel about yourself?
Oh, good question. Who was Tony when he was younger? Well, first of all, I was Anthony when I was younger, and actually when I was 11 years old, my name changed from Anthony to Tony when I attended a basketball camp with a guy called JD, and he was a big American basketball player playing here in Belfast in the 90s. And I'll never forget, I introduced myself as Anthony and he said, Tony. And from then on, I took the name Tony. It is a family name. My uncle's called Tony, my grandfather, but up until that point, I was Anthony, and then I changed to Tony. I think the type of kid I was probably remains true today. Excited, enthusiastic, optimistic, can't always sit still, wants to try new things, wants to adventure. I suppose that's kind of who I was growing up.
And what kind of dreams and aspirations did you have back then?
I think early on, I knew I wanted to do work with young people. That's kind of where my love for education, for teaching, really started. I wanted to be a teacher. I started off coaching basketball when I was 15, 16 years old. I learned a lot about how to teach, how to educate, how to motivate people. And that's kind of been a theme all the way throughout my life. But I think what really changed for me early on, growing up in Belfast, I had quite a narrow kind of worldview about what would be next for me. I sort of expected I would grow up, become a teacher, continue to live in Belfast. And it was only when I was 16 I had this opportunity to go to the United States and do a program out there and do 1 year study in this really fancy, cool private school. It was on scholarship because we could absolutely not have afforded to go there, just the tuition alone. But I moved out when I was 16 and I spent a year there, and just being embraced by a host family and meeting lots of different people, and then having all this attention around us for being the Irish kids in America was massive. It really opened up my whole worldview and it inspired me in a way that I didn't think would be possible, that I would start to see my life outside of Belfast and maybe more globally.
And that's an interesting point to especially 16, you're kind of forming your identity a wee bit, and then you're thrown into a completely different culture. And I'm sure being in America, you're kind of influxed culture-wise. What was your experience like there?
Yeah, it's interesting to talk about the change in cultures. I mean, that was the bit that really excited me. I suppose I was loving basketball growing up as a kid. So the thought of being in a place where basketball was the number one sport, for example, was really exciting. Going back to my early years, kind of growing up, we actually grew up in the Lower Ormo Road, and then we moved to Stranmillis, and that alone, albeit very close, was a big change in culture. So I kind of had a similar experience somewhat in changing cultures, and I was just really excited about it and felt open to change and new things. The States is an incredible place. There's so much going on. I'll never forget going to Times Square and looking around and just being blown away by the lights and all of the action and the hustle. And the whole experience generally being in the United States was fantastic. And I learned a lot more about myself in this new environment than maybe I would have grown up just in Belfast and not leaving.
Mm. And would you say that you were a confident kid growing up?
Confidence is a really interesting trait or skill. I don't know how you want to define it, but actually, the truth be told, when I was very young, sort of 6, 7, 8 years old in primary school, and maybe with this shift that I had made from different parts of Belfast, sort of moving around, my confidence was quite low. I had kind of low self-esteem, and that was probably coupled to do with just family background and dynamics growing up, but also could have just been a part of my personality. So my mother put me into this program called Youth Lyric, and it was all about drama and expression. And so I was able to use that as a avenue for developing confidence, acting and improvising and trying out new things. And actually had the opportunity to perform in the Lyric Theatre, which was awesome as a little kid in the play Midsummer's Night's Dream. And that was a big moment for me in terms of lifting up my confidence. But definitely that experience of going to the United States when I was 16 and launching into a new family, a new school, a new culture, a new country, everything, that really boosted my confidence in a way that is probably indescribable.
And how did you feel coming home? Because I can relate to that sense of like you've been away for so long and then you're coming back to your home and you've had this amazing experience. Like, did you ever feel like it was hard to communicate what you went through and the growth that you had?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was, yeah, you can definitely relate to this change in environment. And ultimately for me, it was reverse culture shock. And I found it much more difficult returning home than I did going out there in the first instance. I think my mother and I struggled in our relationship actually in the return. I'd come back kind of growing up as a young man. That 16 to 17 jump is pretty significant in terms of maturity and your view of yourself and the world. And I really struggled coming home, but found my feet, was able to make sure we rebuild my relationship with my mother, which was critical at the time. But it was difficult resettling in, and once the dust settled and I was able to kind of ground myself again, I was able to take the best bits of having had that experience and couple that with kind of the stability of being back in this place where I've grown up.
And like, what happened next then? Did you go to university or like school or what's next?
So I came back when I was 17 and I went the year below my year in school. So it was a gap year. I didn't get any credit for that year away, which was fine. But what was really cool was it put other people off applying. They didn't want to, you know, be set back one year. Whereas I think life is, please God, it's long and, we need to take risks. And so when I came back, I re-entered school, do my A levels. And yeah, that was also tricky, just kind of getting back into that mode after having had this sort of private school, small class experience. That said, I found myself kind of, getting back into the swing of things, and that went back on track to I'm going to become a teacher. And then I applied to the both of the teacher training colleges in Belfast, St Mary's and Stranmillis. I had an offer to both, and I decided I want to go to Stranmillis, just like the campus better. It was closer to basketball in the PEC. So I made that decision and went on to study to become a business and PE teacher.
And why did you want to be a teacher? What was it that, because that's a very specific, it's very set, it's a very solid kind of industry, as you call it. And typically people spend so many years in being a teacher. So what drew you to it?
Yeah, it does feel quite set and quite stable and maybe safe in some ways. I think if you've ever worked with young people, every day is different and there's so much energy being around young people. So even though the career itself might be quite constant and consistent, I think the experience of being in relationship in a school environment with young people and other teaching staff really appealed to me. I will say though, pretty quickly I realized in my second year of my degree that I probably wasn't going to join mainstream education back here in Belfast. What I started envisioning was maybe a teaching career overseas. Taking my degree and teaching in international schools in different countries. In my third year, I decided to take this opportunity to go to Sweden on Erasmus. And actually, what was really funny was I originally hadn't planned on going away again. It was only because I was involved with the school that I went to in the United States in helping manage and run that program. So I was encouraging people from Belfast in my school, Lagan College, to go to the States. And at the same time, I was neglecting the opportunity that I had to go away to study abroad. And so I kind of copped on basically and thought I have to go, I have to do something. And I was quite late in the process. And if anyone knows me, they know sometimes a little bit late to the party. And I approached the coordinator, Margaret, and I said, Margaret, I really want to go away. I know I've missed the deadline. I'll go anywhere. Send me anywhere. I don't care where you're going to send me. It could be Africa, it could be Europe, it could be the United States. It doesn't matter to me. And she said, well, I do have one space left in a place called Umeå in Sweden. And then I was like, sign me up, sounds amazing. So then I moved to Sweden basically for 6 months study when I was, I think, 21, 22, my third year of college. And that experience again gave me incredible confidence because I was able to form new relationships, kind of join a community of basketball people. Once again, you're spotting a theme, but join this community of basketball people. I began volunteering as a coach. I coached an under 16 girls team in Sweden, not knowing the language, but they took me in and allowed me to coach, which was fantastic. I was also playing. And I spent 6 months out there, sort of being in university, but also having the opportunity to volunteer with this basketball club. And then what was crazy was, and I had the opportunity to guest coach for the top women's team in the city, who competed at the top women's level in Sweden. So I got involved in the club, got to know some of the players, a lot of American players who were playing professionally on this team. And towards the back end of the season, in my time in Umeå in Sweden, the opportunity came up to apply for a head coach job, which meant that I would have to obviously leave college and go and coach professionally for the year. And I had to apply. I had to take the risk. And I interviewed for the job and I couldn't believe it, but I got offered the job. And so I went back to college in Belfast and I said, I'm really sorry. I'm not coming back next year. I'm going to go back to Sweden and coach. So I did. I went back for a full year and coached in what's called the Damligan, which is the top women's basketball league in Sweden.
That's incredible. Wow, I'm starting to it's starting to come together. How you are as a person, all these interests in culture and people, and then obviously basketball is the theme.
Yeah.
And the fact that you took that big risk of applying for the job and then just going for it and picking up and moving to Sweden.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because we've talked about confidence, you and I, and we've talked about, putting yourself out there and taking risks. And I remember thinking just for a split second, oh, I'm not qualified. I don't think I can do this job. I'm 21, 22 years old. I'm not the best person to be leading a team at this level. But only for a split second, because I really believed, true to my core, I probably got this from my mother, that I actually could do it and that I had the energy for it and the right attitude, and anything that I lacked in skills or experience that I would make up for throughout the process of taking it on. So put my best foot forward and got offered that job and spent a year in Sweden. That was, again, very much life-changing, and the relationships I built out there, are still with me today. And I find I can speak more Swedish than I can any other language, which is bizarre, having studied Spanish in school for like 7 years. But it's just it was such an incredible experience for me, so formative in taking on a leadership position at a very young age, working with a women's team, kids from 16, 17 years old all the way through to adult women, and leading them through this kind of competition at the top level was just, it was amazing.
Like, even just being a young man at that age, like, you're so different from what other 22-year-olds are doing. Like, did that ever play on your mind that you're taking a completely different path from like people back home?
That's a good question. Was I aware of the fact that it was a different path? I think so, but I felt like my whole life was quite atypical, and we'd had growing up, we'd had different experiences living in different parts of the city, and then I always had an appetite for new people, different people, being around new and different people, and just trying new things. So I think that has always carried through, and it's been amplified through these different experiences in the US and Sweden. And the truth is I didn't think about anyone else, because I think when it's your journey, you shouldn't think about anyone else. I think you set your course, you keep your eyes up, and you head for that, and try not to be distracted by any other noise, really.
Did you ever feel like an outsider living here?
Did I feel like an outsider living here? Yes, I struggled to the more places I've lived overseas and then I've come home, the more I find it difficult to return here full time. I think that the challenge is when you have these different experiences outside of home, you change and your perspective changes. And I think that's a really positive thing. The difficulty is that when you try to reinsert yourself back into home with all of these changes. Yeah. So at times, yes.
Hmm. So, what was your year like in Sweden? How were you feeling? What energy was going on? And did you think past the year of where this was going to go? Because that's a huge thing to accomplish.
The year in Sweden was it was hard. It was incredible and probably one of the most challenging things I've ever done. The reason it was so difficult and hard at times was, yes, you were far away from home. Yes, I was 21, 22. Culture and language played a part, although the Swedes speak amazing English, better than myself. So it was really hard. I mean, I lived alone above a little pub in the city. I had a little studio apartment. I coached basketball 2, maybe 3 times a day, both with some of the junior players and, of course, the women's team. We were on the road most weeks, traveling to different parts of Sweden. What was challenging was just finding community and finding a tribe and people to connect with outside of that immediate environment of the basketball club. Because, of course, when you're taking on a leadership position like that, your relationship is different with the players. So some of these players who I'd come to know as friends almost, now there was a different dynamic. And so I had to make sure I balanced that with my responsibility of leading the team and making sure that the team was advancing in our objectives and our goals to be successful on the court. I think the thing that really changed for me in feeling more grounded and living in Sweden was just making a network and finding a community outside of my basketball club. I met this one guy called Chris on a flight back from Stockholm to Umeå. Not too many sort of English speakers are making that trip. It's usually locals going up to Umeå. And I heard an American accent, and I introduced myself to Chris, and we became fast friends. And we actually ended up setting up a ritual where every Wednesday we'd go to this little Scottish pub for a quiz night, and we'd grab a beer and we'd sort of download on the week. And he also was living in Sweden as a outsider, as someone who had come from a foreign place. He'd met his partner. She was from Umeå, and that's what brought him there. So I think finding relationships outside of work was really critical to making that year easier, albeit it was really challenging. You also asked me about whether, was I thinking past that year? At the start of the year, I went on a journey from at the start of the year going, oh my goodness, I'm going to be a basketball coach for the rest of my life, and I'm going to be a professional. I'm going to be amazing. I'm going to work so hard at this, and I'm going to be really good. And I went on that journey all the way through to the end, and I realized that's the last thing I want to do in my career and in my life because it's so difficult, and it turned what has been a passion of mine since I was 11 years old. It changed that passion to become a bit more laborious, a bit more like work, and it was uber competitive, but not within the basketball court. I'll never forget the experience of being told on the sideline by a member of one of the basketball community that I was, just moments away from getting sent home and being fired from being sacked from the job. And that was probably midway through the season, and we weren't performing well. And at first it felt really personal. And then I just realized that this is the job, that the job is to get results and help the team perform to get results. And I think it was in that moment I realized this isn't really where I want to hone my own craft and kind of grow my career.
And do you feel like even though whenever you studied and being a teacher for like 2-3 years, did that lend itself to being a coach?
Yeah, the common theme in my career has always been education. Just there's been a thread. Education is just amazing. Learning new things, trying out new things, and it's that sort of adventurous, curious spirit that has helped me in my teaching career and my coaching career, and now in my professional career is in leadership development and team development. So it's always been a thread. So yeah, they all kind of overlap. If you imagine a Venn diagram of my professional career, it's right in the center is everything to do with learning and connection and teams and people coming together.
And it's not easy when you kind of romanticize this idea of like you said, you wanted to be a full-time coach and this is amazing, and then you come to that realization of like, this is not what I thought it would be. And to like, just that's a really hard truth to admit to yourself, especially at that age as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah. I think it goes back to, you asked the question about was I looking outside of myself at other people my age and other tracks in their life. And I think I've never been that person. I think that the beauty of this life that we get to live is that you can do it however you want to do it. And there's many ways to do it. So I've always had hope and optimism that even if this one thing that I think is amazing doesn't work out, there's a million other things I could do. And that's an incredible feeling that I don't take for granted. And I wish more people had this level of optimism and hopefulness that you're meant for so much more than just this one thing. And I think by taking the pressure off a specific path that might feel quite linear and might feel vocational and you might think this is what I want to do forever. I think holding on to that, but being open to the fact that there are many other ways to live and to kind of build a career, build a professional life, I think just gives me comfort and enables me to take risks and move forward.
And that's a powerful mindset as well. Especially, I think, coming from Northern Ireland, I find typically the culture can feel very insular and like people don't want to take up space and they don't want to dream. I mean, I'm generalizing, but there's that energy of like, there's a fear of taking risks and following a different path. And I think it's an amazing mindset that you've been able to like travel to all these different places from a young age, because you obviously didn't feel fear of going to these new places. So what happened after your year in Sweden?
What happened after Sweden? So I didn't become a full-time coach. And as I promised my mum, I returned home and finished my teaching degree. Because I had one more year to do, and that was pretty brutal. It was hard after having worked for a year and had the freedom to live a life that I wanted, to then go back to study and to write a dissertation. It was really painful, but I knew I wanted to finish something I had started, and so after that, I went into teaching and I sub-taught in 3 different schools, and I tried that for a couple of months. But alongside that, I also was working with a nonprofit, international nonprofit that's based in Northern Ireland, Cyprus, the Middle East, South Africa, and it's called Peace Players, and they use basketball to bring kids together from different communities. So, I mean, right up my street in terms of what I cared about. And I found myself doing some freelance work as a coach and as a facilitator, helping with community development, sort of peace building work with young people. And then I started that for a couple of months and I was doing the teaching. I was mixing all these things together. And then I decided I wanted to go right into the peace building work with Peace Players. And so I launched into that and then took on a role and became a kind of a project coordinator working with them.
So then how long were you at that place and what were you doing? And
I did a couple of years, and I also took a summer off, went to summer camp because I worked 3 summers in the States as a basketball director. So I worked in a place called Camp Wiquayak, and I spent a summer there every summer for 3 years during college, sort of after Sweden, I think, actually, maybe before Sweden. No, after Sweden, I did 1 summer, came home, did another summer, and then did a summer after that. But in between those, I was working with Peace Players kind of on and off, and then actually then ended up getting sort of promotion into a senior role where I'd be a team leader in Peace Players, which was fantastic because I really loved kind of the spirit of the work that they wanted to do. And that was a good opportunity for me to grow my career. And so I spent a bit of time there. And then out of nowhere, an opportunity came up to apply to Google in Dublin. And it was just so random. I saw someone post something on Facebook and I liked the look of the role and I loved tech and I really loved Google as a brand at that time. And I was like, oh, this would be awesome. And I threw my hat in the ring, so to speak. And I was going from then education, public sector to non-profit sector, cross community to an opportunity to work in a big tech corporate globally. and I don't know what happened, but I ended up getting offered to that job. Well, actually, the truth is, and this is a pretty funny story because I hadn't been doing a lot of work in tech, but the job was about advertising and supporting advertisers in Google, right? And I'd sent my CV in, and the recruiter said, "Wow, this person looks really interesting." Probably down to a lot of the international experience I'd had. But they said, it's just a shame he doesn't have a bit more tech experience, maybe anything at all, really, in web or anything. And I said, give me that CV back. And so I took the CV back, added a couple more things of stuff that I had done in building websites and communities and different things online. And I said, this looks a bit better, take it back. And that led to an interview. And yeah, I think the interviews went okay. Thought they could have went better, but they obviously saw potential and took me in. So what was crazy was I had to go back to my manager here in Belfast in this non-profit where I was recently promoted, and they were investing in me, and I said, I've got this opportunity, and I don't know what to do. And I showed him the offer letter and explained to him, and he was like, he put his hand out and he said, you got to take it. And he congratulated me and said, you've got to go. And the thing that he said to me that gave me confidence and inspired me was that he felt that I was made for that environment of like sort of innovation, hyper growth, lots of people, lots of opportunities. And he felt like, wow, this would be a really good adventure for me. So then that's kind of pushed me over the edge to take it, even though I was conflicted between staying in the nonprofit and doing this type of sort of really impactful work to joining a corporate where I was going to be supporting advertising. So it was a real challenge. And I know at the time I was conflicted, and friends of mine were on different sides of the camp of like, is this the direction you want to go? And ultimately I thought the one piece of career advice that I got was, if I don't take this opportunity now, when will I have the opportunity to do it again? And I looked down the timeline. I thought, if I stay in nonprofit, I'm going to build a career here, and I won't have the opportunity to pivot and try something like this out, whereas it might be easier to go the other way after. So,
and nonprofit work is beautiful, but it's so hard. And because my parents run a charity, and I just know, and I've grown up like around that environment my whole life, and I just know how taxing it is emotionally. Like, that you're making such a difference, but it comes at a cost as well, because you're never going to fix everybody's problems. And it's an interesting transition, but it actually does make sense, because the tech world, there's probably more resources and more ideas and more inspiration and kind of creativity, where nonprofit education, there's still a lot of tape around how far you can go. Like, everything just takes so much longer to make a difference.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head in a number of ways. In my experience, albeit it was very limited, I think that everyone's heart is in it. And yet when it comes to the pressures of fundraising, when it comes to nonprofit, everything's quite focused and earmarked for specific programs. And there wasn't the same flexibility and fluidity that you have in a private enterprise, where you can do what you want without having to worry about sort of, really being directive towards what the funder has said you need to do. And and that's not a criticism, it's just a fact. I think that oftentimes I was frustrated in that work because I felt like we could go deeper with the young people we were working with and create more opportunities for them to play basketball together and build stronger relationships. But ultimately, at times in the nonprofit, it's a numbers game. And I did find that. And again, not a criticism, just a fact.
Fair play, yeah, I don't think it'd be for me. So then you enter Google, and how are you feeling, and what is the scope?
So what's crazy is I joined Google for this advertising role. It was entry level. It was actually referred to as a grad role. I was within a year and a half out of my degree, so actually was kind of one of the more older senior folks, because I had taken the year out. Remember, in fact, I'd taken 2 years. I had taken the year for the US, the year for Sweden, both of which set me back from kind of being the same age as these other new graduates. And our job was very simple. It was to support advertisers who were spending money on Google. And I really thought Google had the opportunity to help small businesses. And I really thought, when I learned more about the product, that I could add value to these small businesses. And I thought, this is the greatest job ever. I just get to speak to people every day, help them solve problems, and do it at a fast pace, which suited me. And I loved it. I have to say, I really enjoyed it. It was hard, you had some really angry, pissed off advertisers at times, and it was difficult and the product wasn't always the easiest, but by and large, I enjoyed it. Plus, we were getting paid, way more than I think we were worth or deserved or whatever. But that was the market that we were in. What was really interesting to me was being around other individuals who had joined Google who felt like this work was beneath them at times, or that um, they felt they were in a call center, or, they were just generally not satisfied with their role. I found that to be really challenging. Coming from the background and experience that I had, I was just so grateful to have, a really well paid job, free food. What are we talking about? And thirdly, and most importantly, I actually believe what we were doing was helping advertisers, and they were typically small businesses, Joe the plumber, or small retail store online, or whatever it was. You're helping them improve their business. So I loved it, but I struggled at times to be around others who maybe didn't see the opportunity that they had.
So how did you find living in Dublin, and how long were you in Google for?
I was in Dublin for about a year and a half then in that first role with Google, and I found a basketball community, of course, to try and ground myself outside of work, which I think, again, is a critical thing, especially in an environment like Google or like a multinational where there are a lot of folks that have traveled in and therefore latch on to one another because it's a new home for everyone. So for me, it's always important to have a little bit of separation between the work community and then just having a personal life outside of that. So I locked into a basketball community and at the same time made great friends within Google, people from all over the world, who I'm still friends with today in that first year and a half. So it was super fun. It was like going back to university in some ways. You kind of had a big Erasmus group of students, and we would hang out and we'd go to the bars, we'd go to the cinema, we'd do trips, and I was able to show people around Belfast, which was epic. And so that part of Dublin was excellent. I didn't love Dublin as a city. It's not for me. It's kind of bigger than Belfast, smaller than London, and I kind of felt like it wasn't my favorite city in the world to live in. I thought it was hard to get around different places and so on. So I spent a year and a half there. And the big thing with this kind of graduate entry role for Google is it's really difficult, or it was really difficult to get promoted, but promotion would enable you to look internationally for roles. So I was so focused on getting promoted. And luckily I had a couple of really good managers at that time who helped guide me and coach me through my performance in that role. And I got promoted after, I think, just under a couple of years, and I think about 2 years in. And basically what happened was I was going through a breakup. This is a true story. I was going through a breakup. And that led me to look at other opportunities quickly. I was like, all right, what else is out there? Yeah, get me out of here. And so I started looking online in the internal kind of job posting website at Google, because I still had more things to do in Google, and I wanted to grow still there. And this opportunity came up for a program manager running onboarding, sort of kind of new hires coming in. So it's kind of back to my education sort of facilitation piece. And I've been doing lots of that within Google within these first 2 years. And I looked at the location of the role because the role was perfect for me. I thought, this is what I should be doing. I know the team. And it was in Singapore. And bear in mind, like I'd been to the United States and London, maybe. I mean, I don't even know if I'd been anywhere else really. Sweden, of course, but outside of that, never really that far east. And I was like, oh my God, yes. Then I get to go to Asia. That'll be nuts. Let's do that. So I applied again, and thankfully my experience in working with that team and the relationships I had built put me in good favor with the hiring manager. And I would say I was reputable, and so they took a punt and hired me. And then I moved to Asia pretty quick. That was pretty nuts. So I was like, I'd never been to Asia. I'd never been. Farthest east had been like probably Spain or something. And so I moved to Asia, albeit Singapore is quite westernized, I think, and quite modern and a different sort of vibe than maybe some other Asian cities. But yeah, it was epic.
Well, thank God for your breakup. In the sense of like it pushed you to like really just like go and do something completely different in a different country. Like Asia, that's I've never been myself, and I feel like that's the one, I was thinking about that today, like it's the one culture I feel really ignorant to. I just don't understand, and I haven't really grown up around like people from that background. So how did you feel?
Well, let me tell you something about my experience moving to, and I said Asia. It was actually, the region was Asia Pacific, so they call it APAC in Google, and that represents basically countries like India, China, Australia. These three places have very little in common. So when I say Asia, I should make sure I say APAC because it's more representative. And also, what I learned immediately was the diversity. You know, we're not talking about the British Isles here. We're not talking about Scotland and Ireland. We're talking about, yeah, like I said, we're talking about Japan and Korea and New Zealand and, you know, everything in between, the Philippines. And, you know, it was a huge diversity. And that was the most exciting. I was so lit up. I had a team of, I think, 50 different people who were in each of these local offices, some of these places I've mentioned, and you know, I got to meet with them on a kind of weekly basis, and these folks all had full-time jobs that would support onboarding in their local office, so they kind of played a little part-time role. But you know, you're getting on a call from Singapore, being this kind of you know, white Irish guy from Belfast, and then on the call you've got all these people from India to China to Korea to Japan to New Zealand to Australia, and you're going, this is epic. This is so fun. And just my passion for, you know, different voices, it was just amazing. It was such a great experience. So I was in Singapore for about a year and a half, and then then I fell in love. And so then I fell in love and then moved from Singapore to London with the person that I met. And so we moved, she's from Scotland. So we moved from from Singapore to London. So that was really a personal move. And I've always found in my life and career that some moves are about the job and other moves are about me as a person. And the move out to Singapore was about the role. Remember, I said when I read the role, I was like, this is the job I got to do next. Didn't matter where it was. It could have been anywhere in the world. It just happened to be in Asia, and that's where I went. Whereas this one was very much, I was loving the job. I really liked my team. I had such a great team around me in sort of people development in Google Singapore, and people from India and the Philippines and the US and France. And it was a cool team of really nice people to work in Australia. There was a great team, but then I had this opportunity then to kind of move with my partner back west. And so we took that and moved to London, took a role that I didn't really want to do. It was in staffing and recruitment, and it wasn't something I'd ever saw myself doing, but I felt like I had onboarded new hires and I was like, oh, how do we get the best people into your organization? And that's a critical component, I think, to having a successful company or business or team, getting the right people in the door in the first instance. So I learned a lot in like 2-3 years working in London then.
It's funny, I can just feel your energy of you telling that story. Like, it seems like it was a challenging transition of like, this is the life and it's really exciting. I'm sure the lifestyle over there was so different to London's a hard place and it's different environment. You're also moving with your partner. You're not doing a job that you love. Yeah. What was that experience like?
Yeah, the energy. It's interesting you spotted the energy dip. It was hard. I mean, growing up in Belfast, I really didn't want to live in London or Dublin. Neither city appealed to me growing up, probably for loads of different reasons I'm not even consciously aware of, but I didn't want to be there. If I was going anywhere, I wanted to be in New York or, you know, or in Singapore or, you know, anywhere else really outside of the Isles. And yeah, it was a hard move. It was absolutely the right move ultimately. And you know, even we were debating where to move back west, kind of which part of the world. It was kind of London for me and for work as well. So, you know, I was absolutely like, this is where we got to go to. I knew I'd be closer to home. So that was a real plus, that I could hop on a quick flight and be back in Belfast, which was exciting. And yeah, so I wasn't really keen on London. I was not keen on the job, but I knew I would learn a lot from it. And I grew to love London. I found my tribe with basketball mostly and a little bit in work also. And you know, made great friends again who remain friends today. And and then I fell in love with London. I think it's a great city. When you find your feet there, there's really nothing you can't do when you live in London, and it's fantastic. And yeah, it's just a great city to live in. And once you find your people, I think it's much more bearable, albeit it's really hard. I always tell people in London, everything's in 1 hour away. It's everywhere. Go to basketball, 1 hour there, 1 hour back. It's pretty taxing. Whereas being back in Belfast, everywhere is 15 minutes away, which is a um, uh, much more fun experience sort of traveling.
And how are you feeling within yourself in terms of, because you're making all these kind of different shifts within your career? Like, what were you thinking about the trajectory of your life at that point?
I don't think about the trajectory of life. I think I've got today. I think I've got today, and whatever I do today better be my best, and I better pour my heart into it and give it the best shot I can, because that's all I think any of us have. And, even today, or even yesterday, I had a conversation with a friend about someone who was in their 60s who had a heart attack and passed away suddenly. And my brother lost a good friend and colleague who again was, I think, late 50s. And we're not guaranteed much, so I think every day I just take it as it comes. Of course, I have to be thoughtful and strategic about the direction, and especially when you're growing a business and your own career. But that's only a small part. I think I'm always trying to keep my eyes on the kind of the present where possible.
And so, how long were you in London for?
Was there for about 3 long years in London. Oh, it was. I was ready to go at the end of it. I was ready to go, and yeah, I was ready to go. In fact, I was beyond ready. So much so that by the time I was thinking about leaving London, I was actually thinking about leaving Google. I probably, by and large, in that period of time in London, I was like, I want to get out of Google. And I thought I did, and I wasn't sure, is it the role, is it the city? It's hard when you're trying to discern the different factors on your life that are impacting you in both either a positive or a negative way. And I really wasn't sure. I had some people saying, it's just the role, Tony. If you change your role and you get back to your leadership development work, your team development work, you're going to be back on track. I had others sort of saying, Tony, you were only going to go to Google for 2 years. It's time to get out. And, you got to listen to your inner voice. And where I ended up was there was an opportunity to come back to the island, back to the island of Ireland and go to Dublin. And I thought that'll get me closer to home. I'll split my time. I'll start to, check out Belfast again, see what the vibe's like. And took this job in Dublin. It was a global learning and development role. I mean, on paper, it was perfect for me. I'd get to run and sort of strategize all kind of learning and development for this 500-person sales organization. And I'm like, this is perfect. And it's global, and I get a bit of travel, and I've got a team. I've got a team in APAC, a team in the Americas. It's going to be great. But I knew within about 2 weeks of leaving London and going to Google in Dublin, I was done. And I knew for me it was time to exit. And I struggled with that, the guilt of taking on a new role and not being able to do it justice or stay longer. I just felt like, yeah, that chapter had closed for me, and I just needed to catch up with the story that was already written.
Wow. And that's hard. That's a lot of navigating and making that decision for yourself. So you're in that role for 2 weeks and then you left?
So I was in the role for 2 weeks, but I know better than to make an impulsive decision, and I sat with it for a couple of months to see if things would change, or because that's too soon to make a rash decision. I just packed up my whole life, moved from London to Dublin, and I yeah, I waited it out for about 3 months, and it wasn't, look, there was lots of positives. Actually, I really liked my manager, and some of my team that I was working with, I really enjoyed, and it was nice to be in Dublin. I live with a great Spanish couple, and I was able to go up and down the road from Belfast, and I quite enjoyed the kind of living the two worlds of being at home with family, friends, and community, and then being able to work still for Google in a really cool international sort of tech company. I think after about 3 months, I knew nothing had changed significantly, and I was ready to leave. And I think it was about 4 or 5 months I handed in my notice, and I'll never forget the experience because I felt terribly guilty, and I wasn't really sure how bad I felt about leaving so soon after taking on a new role until I was telling my manager. And I said to my manager, Francois, I said, look, here's the story. I want to, I'm really done. I've got to leave. And he kind of looked at me and he interrupted me in the middle of me trying to resign. And he said, "You don't need to feel guilty about anything." And he could just sense kind of the weight of me making this decision that it was having on me, and the pressure of actually not wanting to do a bad job or not wanting to leave too soon. But he really gave me permission to leave. And not only that, encouraged me and said, "I've had these experiences in my career." So uh, yeah, it's I've had a mix of managers in my career, and it's why I love the work we get to do, because we get to build manager development programs for companies all over the world. And having had my fair share of incredible experiences with managers like this one, and also some terrible, terrible experiences like we all have had, has helped me to formulate a philosophy and teachings and things that I think are really important for managers to kind of take on board to be effective.
That's so interesting. And then once you handed in your notice, like what? So you knew that you had to leave, but were you thinking, what's next?
Yeah, well, that was at the time. At the time I handed in my notice, it was about, I think it was December 2019, which meant that my last day ended up being February 26th, 2020, which was a couple of weeks before the pandemic had swept from the east over to this part of the world. Thankfully at the time, I had been debating between, do I want to start a business and do some of these things that I'm passionate about, that I think I have some ideas around how to make things better when it comes to working with teams and leaders and managers. I kind of want to do this business thing. That would be really fun. Or do I take myself off and go traveling? I had bought this cool bike and I was like, I'll take the bike and I'll go around Europe and it'll be awesome and I'll clear the head and sort of take some time off from work. Thankfully, I had decided I was going to start the business because travel would have been impossible, obviously, with the pandemic. And then oftentimes when I tell people I started my business March 2020, they kind of look at me like, oh, that's really unfortunate timing. But the truth is, it ended up being a real blessing in disguise in terms of for me and growing the business. It was a horrible time for so many people, and I never want to forget that. And it was so challenging for all of us being locked in and not being able to do things we want to do and see our loved ones. I know my mother was shielding for 2.5 years basically, and that was really hard. But from a business perspective, for me, it made my market grow exponentially from what I was thinking was going to be primarily London and Dublin based, a little bit in Belfast, to we now have a global business because everyone's online. So we can work with people in Australia and in New York and Dubai. It doesn't really matter, because we're all working from the same screen. So it kind of evened the playing field.
So what was the business, and like how you obviously have the confidence to put yourself out there. You've got this, years of experience of working in all these different places, but like, how did you know that this was the thing? And like, that's such a big leap of being employed for so long to then taking things your own way.
Yeah, it is a big leap unless you know more about me and all these million side projects that I've had even during my time in Google or in Peace Players or as a student. I've built basketball communities and leagues and started online events and in-person events, and I'm quite comfortable in executing ideas and visions that I have. And so it felt like, that didn't feel difficult. And before you ask what was the strategy or the thinking ahead of like what did I want to do, I just wanted to do really good work. I just wanted to get stuck in and see where I could add value and serve people in this sort of general space of people development. And it started off me in my bedroom, in a shared apartment with my brother on a little computer to, now we've got several offices and we have three of us full time. And, that's been the growth over 3 years. But honestly, at the start, it was just let's get in, start doing things, learn as we go or learn as I go from the bedroom and try new things, take some risks. And yeah, thankfully, again, so grateful to all the people that had the confidence to trust me, this kind of new, small business owner, this new freelancer, and give me an opportunity. And yeah, it's been an incredible journey of just honing the craft and trying new things and getting better every single day. So started off in the bedroom and then decided to hire one of my best friends, which again, others might go against that rationale, but I think one of the benefits of hiring someone and you trust them and you have a good relationship. Now, I wouldn't hire every one of my friends, but this person in particular was the opposite thinker to me and could provide the stability, consistency, and sort of this different approach to the work around organization, logistics, and so on, that I knew that I was really struggling to kind of spend energy on without detracting from the work. So that was a big step. That was probably the single greatest step in the business, was to make a full-time hire. I never thought that would have been the case. I started off thinking, yes, it'll be me, I'll be running this business, but making a hire was a big step, and definitely a highlight in terms of helping us grow and scale a little bit further. But yes, we've gone from, yes, me in the bedroom, to making a hire. We're making our third hire, sort of a creative person to again help us really elevate the quality of the work. And now, yeah, we've several offices in Belfast, up at the Innovation Factory, which is awesome. And we're also global. We've got a team of what we call playmakers. These are people that, like me, care deeply about bringing fun and energy to this work. And they're based all around the world. So they come in and help support our programs, either online or in person. Yeah, I think the challenges were at the start, when I was trying to figure out what to do and what not to do. And that's what they say strategy is. It's more about what you don't do rather than what you do. So that was probably one of the hardest things. And even now, 3 years on, I think we're probably open enough to try new things, in a way that I think is helpful, but not, and not too closed. But it's just finding that balance between, doing what you're really good at, but also not staying idle, being open to innovation and trying new things. I mean, even just the last couple of weeks, we've brought in these songwriting workshops to senior leadership teams, where they're learning to tell a story, to collaborate, to be creative, and they create this song at the end of it. And that's just been amazing, because that is such a unique way to learn the skills of collaboration and storytelling and crafting a message and inspiring others. And that's just been probably, again, one of the highlights over the last 3 years, is bringing more creativity to the field of leadership and team development.
And just one question I'd love to touch on is, like, from a financial standpoint, did you have a lot of, like, this is something we've been asking all the business owners, like, do you need a lot of money to start these kind of businesses? Obviously, they're from different backgrounds. What was that like for you?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, money and finance are a taboo topic, for many, not for me. I think we need to be more open and honest with others. I think it'll even the playing field out. I think someone referred to it to me as price intelligence. And all these companies, they hold that because they know what we all cost as creatives, freelancers, small businesses, but we often don't share enough with one another. And therefore, it's really difficult to understand your value proposition and where you should price yourself in the services and the value that you're bringing to these organizations. When I started, I knew that, I had savings from my past seven years working, and I knew that I didn't need a whole lot to survive living in Belfast. I had a small apartment with my brother at the time. Since he's moved out, he had enough of me. But, I knew that I just needed to make X amount, and it wasn't a whole lot. And I just wanted to do the work, right? When I started the business from the bedroom, I needed nothing but a laptop and kind of a bit of enthusiasm. There wasn't a whole lot of expenses. I did early on invest in a branding sort of process to create the logo. I think it's worthwhile doing that because, excuse me, I think it's worthwhile investing in branding and at the start, or a logo, because I think you're communicating your value, visually. And I think that's what I look at as a consumer, as a purchaser, as a buyer. I want to know, who you are, what you stand for. And I think having a really strong brand or logo can help with that. But outside of that, there's not really much else in my field that I needed to start. I needed good relationships, an opportunity to come in and facilitate. And I was able to just create space and time to be creative. Oftentimes when I was working full time, I thought to myself, what would it be like if I was doing this as a business? And what would it take? And more than money, it took time and energy. I think that's the greatest resource that you can put into action when you do decide to start a business. If you can, have the time and the energy, and obviously enough resources that you need to live, and that you got to work out what you actually need to live. That's critical. And I knew what that was for me. But in terms of startup costs, I didn't need much money. In fact, one story and anecdote that reinforces this is when I put together my largest proposal, it was about 40K at the time, and it was a huge program. It was a 1 year effort for this client. And I remember putting it forward thinking, gosh, how will I manage this? How will I fund this by myself? How will I make this work? And when I put that proposal together, I knew that if I got it, I would then get some funds early as a deposit that would enable me to do the work in the best possible way. So it's kind of a proof of concept or minimum viable product. Spending time and energy and helping, buy others in on the vision that you have in your project, whatever it is, I think is a step in the right direction. And then absolutely ask for a deposit for your work. Take an initial payment that will help set you up for success financially to realize the vision.
So my last question is, what piece of advice would you give to your younger self?
Yeah, oh God, good question. Okay, yeah. The piece of advice I'd give to my younger self would be even more bold, like be courageous, take more risks. I think that I do take risks. And then I look at other successful entrepreneurs in this space. I look all around the world and I see the people that have, built something amazing and they've created something fantastic. And I look at their story and they've taken risks. So I would be way more bold, way more of a risk taker and really believe in. And I'm saying this to my younger self and my current self and my future self because it's something that constantly comes up for us, that we think in our business, we're at a level where the work that we're producing, our clients are satisfied, they're really happy with our work. So we have to continue to believe in ourselves and help just elevate what we're doing every day.